Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to URC Youth Trialogue. My name's Tom Hackett, and I'm your host for this evening, and I'm joined, as usual, by three panelists. This evening, we're looking at the topic of Dreams. We're looking at the story of Joseph in Genesis chapter 37, and our three panelists will be reflecting on that passage and the theme of Dreams. So I'll invite our panelists to introduce themselves so that you can hear a little bit more about our panelists this evening. So Tanya, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Reverend Tanya Stormo Rasmussen. I am currently the minister at the Congregational Church of Hollis in Hollis, New Hampshire. Prior to moving here almost 5 years ago, I was serving as the minister at the Wheatley United Reformed Church for 7 years. I was the chaplain at Mansfield College for 6 years, lived there. My husband teaches at Mansfield College, at Oxford University, and I've served in the United Church of Christ, the United Reformed Church, the United Methodist Church, and in a couple of other denominations, but I'll leave it at that for that, and that's where I am.
Okay, thank you. And Joseph?
Yeah, so I'm a first year student here at Westminster College in Cambridge. My name is Joseph. I feel like I was called, or my purpose of being here is really ignited by what we're about to study. So I'm excited to be here. Yeah, so pretty much just hoping to enjoy tonight's session.
Okay, thanks, Joseph. And
So I'm Ian Rowe. I am the only person who's not a minister or training to be a minister. So I'll leave the theology to you two guys. I am a young person who has lived all over the UK and in the Netherlands. And I'm currently based in the West Midlands Synod in North Birmingham. And yeah, just getting through this crazy pandemic like the rest of us.
Okay, thank you. And as I said, my name's Tom Hackett. I'm the Children's and Youth Development Officer in Southern Synod. So this evening, our theme is about Dreams, and we are looking at the story of Genesis chapter 37. So this is the start of the story of Joseph. The story begins with, we hear about Jacob and his sons. We hear about that Jacob has lots of sons and that Joseph is Jacob's favorite son, and that he gives him a special ornate robe, which annoys his brothers. We then hear about Joseph having dreams, which he tells to his brothers as well. Dreams about sheaves of corn and wheat that are bowing down to their brothers' sheaves, and this annoys them more. After that, we hear about Joseph's brothers' plan to kill Joseph, and then towards the end of the passage they change their plan. They sell Joseph to some Israelites, and then he gets sold into slavery in Egypt. So that is how the story ends, but it's the start of the story of Joseph. And there's lots in that can relate to our theme of Dreams. So it'll be interesting to hear about what your thoughts are as you have read the passage. The three panelists tonight have already had some questions that they have been prepared, but we also want you to send in your own questions. So for everyone who's watching along live, there is a link on your screen to Slido. Follow those details and you're able to share comments from what you're listening, what you're hearing, and any questions. We'd love to hear what you are saying. Also, we want tonight to be about learning from the different viewpoints and it to be a platform for greater conversation. So we also have a resource which is down in the description below the video. If you click to expand the information, you'll see a link to our Going Deeper resource, which is for you at home to carry on the conversations with yourself and with others. We want this to be a launch pad as well. We recognise we've got different individuals here which will bring different viewpoints. And this evening is not about debating different viewpoints, but we want to learn from each other and it to be an opportunity to deepen our knowledge and strengthen our thoughts about the passage as we look at it and around the theme. So before we get into our first question, I am going to lead us in a time of prayer, and then we will begin with the first question. So dear Lord, thank you that we're able to join together here tonight. Thank you for the technology that has enabled all of our panelists and everybody watching at home to be together. Although physically distant, we're able to be here together and guide our conversations as we explore your word. Let your spirit guide us in those conversations. And as we hear different viewpoints and different thoughts, help us to listen to one another and to grow deeper through your words. Amen.
Amen. Man, powerful. Thank you.
We will get started. Just a reminder, everybody watching at home, do send in your questions using Slido. The first question, looking at Genesis chapter 37, the first question was about what are the most important parts of the passage that teach us about dash dreams and vocation. So Tanya, I'll ask you to reflect first. What are the most important parts for you?
Sure, but before I get started with that, I should have said at the very outset, thank you for inviting me to be part of this and to reconnect with my United Reformed Church sisters and brothers, and to be part of this. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here.
So the most important parts of the passage that teach us about dashed dreams and vocation, I think as I read the passage, it was interesting to note that the first thing that happened, first of all, everything happens within community. And I think right now, we were talking a little bit before we went live about the importance of being a part of community. This whole story is set in the context of familial community, but community, family is everywhere, right? So Joseph is in this family, and anytime you're in community, you're going to have experience of jealousy and of power dynamics and of people trying to jockey for position. And that's one of the first things that we see. He was obviously identified as the favorite. So there was jealousy there, even right at the very beginning. Joseph was having dreams. And what's really important in terms of our own personal discernment of our vocation, of gifts, of our gifts, of our call, is that we are able to share our sense of what might God be saying to me. And so what I saw in the story as I read Genesis 37 was Joseph sharing with his nearest community, his family, what he had seen in a dream. And it doesn't say that he shared it with self-importance, but it was obvious that he was the important character. So he was the one that everyone was bowing down to. One can see, if you're already jealous, how one could interpret that as, oh, he thinks he's all high and mighty. He already is the favored one because he didn't choose to be the favorite son. He just was, found this about himself. So there was that dynamic going on. He shared his visions, his dream with his family, with his community. And then the community had a response. And how did they listen? They listened through the filters of their jealousy or through the filters of their experience. You noticed at the end that his father, that Jacob, first reprimanded Joseph for being so, your mother and your father are going to bow down to you. And then he said, then the narrator says, but Jacob, his brothers plotted to kill him, but Jacob thought about these things. So those were the two things that I thought, those were really important. Sharing your dreams and your visions, and also listening to the dreams and visions of other people.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tanya. That's really interesting to hear those thoughts. Reminder before we go on to, we'll go to Joseph next, but for everyone who's watching, please do send in any thoughts and comments. And if you want to include your name as well, or where you're listening from, it would be good to hear who it is that we have joining us for this conversation this evening as well. So Joseph, the same question to you. Looking at Genesis 37, what were the most important parts of the passage in relation to dash dreams?
I think I must admit, outside of Jesus, Joseph is his story is one that really stands out for me. Not just because it might seem like I'm biased and I have the name Joseph, so I'm privileged or anything. That has nothing to do with it. Okay, it might have something to do with it, but I think what really stands out to me in terms of importance is that it's not just the fact that Joseph has the gift of being able to receive dreams, but also, as we will later find out, interpret dreams. It's also that he had a very strong character. Well, we can say that his dad loved him most, but he was also trusted. He had that sense where he can be asked to do something by his dad, and he would ultimately fulfill that, even if it is a case of reporting his own brothers, which in essence he does. So I think it really stands out to me that Joseph was a person who was gifted and also has the character and integrity to sort of like complement that gifting. And so I think that is essential for his own vocation, which would ensue. At a very humble age of 17, he had such a strong character. So I think that really does stand out to me, that it's not just because he had this amazing gift of being able to receive and interpret dreams, but also a person of integrity to sort of like complement that.
Okay, thanks, Joseph. And Ian, the same question to you.
I thought it was really interesting what you both had to say about how you were sort of more emphasizing the community aspect, Tanya, of like how this is all within a community, and then Joseph was more emphasizing kind of the individual characteristic. What I got most of from this passage was a theme of rejection. Like Joseph talks about these dreams and these experiences, and I was in their shoes. If someone said, I had a dream that you would bow down to me, it wouldn't be the most lovely thing anyone had said to me. But obviously they reject him in such an extreme way. All of them do, apart from Reuben. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because it's sort of, I think in a sense they reject him from a leadership perspective. But also what's interesting is that all of the dreams are about him as an individual, but within that wider community. So it's not, I had this dream that, I went off and had this amazing life and you all stayed here. It was, I have this dream where I am more important than you, essentially. And I thought it was very interesting, because even within the dream, there's like this element of community, and this element of sort of like him leading them and everything. And I thought that was just very interesting, because it was, even though they reject it, they are more rejecting this sort of role, in a sense that he's predicting that will happen within that community, which obviously we know eventually happens with the story in Egypt. But I thought it was just very interesting that even though he has that very strong character, it's still within this community setting, and that the brothers are an integral part of the entire story. And I just thought it was just interesting to think about at the moment, with the community struggling and everything, that no matter where we go and what we do, we're still very much of where we're from. It was just very interesting.
Can I just say something that just occurred to me?
Yeah, of course.
Going on from what Ian and Tanya just mentioned, it's quite interesting that he shared the dream. And as Ian just pointed out, that dream wasn't necessarily a selfish dream, because in much sense, it may be perceived as being selfish because he's going to be on the throne. But what we find out later was that it was for all their benefit. And I think it's quite interesting that the brothers sort of like received the dream in a very negative way, but yet his dad sort of like Tanya said, he would think about it. And I think that's really interesting, just to make the observations that they sort of like received it differently. And it's easy to sometimes sort of like overreact based on having your own presuppositions. So I think that's just a very interesting observation.
It's interesting because Joseph is called to lead and the brothers are called to follow. And I think that's it's a weird dynamic. I think a lot of us want to be leaders and want to be the person at the front. And I think in a way, being called to not be that is kind of like, well, I'm not as important. And there's an element of, especially since he's obviously the youngest, second youngest brother. And you sort of, I've got two older sisters. And if I was his age when I was 17 and they were sort of in their early 20s, and I said, I've decided that I'm going to lead you both, I think they would tell me that they weren't very impressed with that dream, and that I should go away in probably less nice language. And I think that's just interesting, because being called to follow is actually also an incredibly difficult thing to do. As in many ways, it's harder than being called to lead, sometimes.
Okay, thank you. We've had a comment in from one of our listeners. So hello to Victoria Turner, who's up in Edinburgh in Scotland. She has a comment about a question about how can we discern right calling from selfish desires. So she goes on to say that, are we all meant to be like Joseph? So, and that she has an issue of Joseph's boastful nature. That doesn't, at least in this passage, amplify the gifts of his brothers in this passage. So the question there was about how can we discern right calling from selfish desires? I wonder if any of you have any thoughts.
I do have a thought about that, and partly because it was really, this is the first time I've read it with, I tried to come to it as we always ought to try to come to scripture, with fresh eyes and with a new understanding. And so I put myself in Joseph's shoes and suddenly realized, well, he's not, it doesn't say that he came and boasted to his family about his dreams. He came and he shared his dreams to his family. And they responded as though he was boasting, because they already hated him. And that was part of the point I was making in the beginning. They already had a grudge against him because he had been identified as the favorite son. And imagine if you of course there must have been some self-importance there, because he'd always been treated as though he was the most important one. He was the baby until Benjamin came along. But so I didn't read that it said that he came boasting to his brothers. He said, listen to this dream. And if you're presenting a dream of where you're the big person in it, then yes, it probably sounds boastful. But I wondered whether that was necessarily the case, or if he was just trying to figure it all out. But in answer to the question, how do we discern whether our vocation, our calling, is of God or is our own self-importance, is discerned in community. That's why community is so important, and that's why we've got to share our vision for ourselves. And that's why, like, Joseph is going through the ordination process, and he's surely not doing it on his own. He's got a team of people who are circled around him, who are discerning with him. They're not doing this he's not said, oh, I've discerned a call from God and I am meant to be a pastor of a church. You have the communities that is affirming the gifts that they see in you. And this is what happens across Joseph's lifetime. His brothers couldn't see it, but others recognized his gift. And it doesn't say that he didn't necessarily interpret the dream at first. He just had vivid dreams, but maybe he kept having vivid dreams and learned how to interpret them. It was his brothers and his father that interpreted it. They're the ones who said, we're bowing down to you. Right?
So good.
Yeah. Joseph, did you have anything to add? I saw you looking and
yeah, I think is what Tanya said is just absolutely spot on. I think it's a really good question. And what I would sort of like add on to that is that I think it's quite interesting, because Joseph can be perceived as that he was like the chosen one, especially his dad sort of like made him feel like that. And that's a direct response to his older brothers sort of thing. And as a result, that sort of like created jealousy. But I think it's also important to sort of like see it in the sense that Joseph, in essence, perhaps you can perceive him as being naive, because he tells the first dream and then he states another dream. And so it sort of like adds to the bitterness that the brothers have. And I think you can't necessarily control how people feel about you, even your own family, because a vision is not for your own. And it ties in with the next part of the question, how do you discern whether this is of God or whether this is more of a selfish dream, is that it's always going to be for the benefit of others. However, if it's seen as for your own benefit, then it can be perceived as selfish. But what we find out later on is that that dream was for the benefit, not of Joseph, but of the whole community beyond his family, for his own nation, even for the nation of Egypt. And so I think when you see it like that, then you realize that this is not a selfish vision. Him sharing it with his family perhaps might be seen as, I'm going to be on top. But with everything that Joseph had to go through in order to achieved that dream, it sort of like vindicates that it wasn't a case of him being boastful. It was a case of, perhaps you can accuse him of being naive, but this is his family. Why should they sort of like treat him that way? You should be happy if you're, but then at the same time, it's plausible to think about the fact that, like Ian was saying, you're the youngest one and you're going up to your older siblings and say that I'm going to lead and you're going to follow. But the fact that it wasn't in Joseph to sort of like come across as boastful, but perhaps it was perceived by the brothers who, being this quote unquote chosen person, is sort of like it comes across. So I think that's really important to see, because God gives us visions or dreams, not just for ourselves, but for the benefit of others. And it's just really important to always remember that, because if it's for only your benefit, then you have to start questioning whether this is a God-given sort of dream, if that makes sense.
Okay. Ian, do you have any thoughts to add?
I thought it was really, both what you said and how you sort of build each other, what was really interesting. You both sort of saying that, you know, the dream is it's a community-based thing, and I completely agree with you that there's an element of naivety from Joseph, of going to people, and you know, we don't know if he knew how his brothers felt around him. You know, like we were saying earlier, he didn't choose to be the favorite. That was just what happened. And you know, and reading the passage again, as you were talking, sort of, he doesn't say, I sorted up and said, I'm going to be, you know, the big cheese and you're going to have to bow down to me. It's like, I've had this dream, you know, this is what's happened. And then there's this instant negative reaction. There's that kind of confirmation bias of Joseph, the chosen one, or now even God's telling him he's the chosen one. Instead of saying like, how are we able to say, what does this mean? How are we able to explore this? How are we able to think about our different roles in it? And I think that you're both entirely right in the sense that a way to think about how a message or a vision or some sort of message from God is from God, is thinking about it not in that sort of how is this affecting me, it's all about me kind of way, instead of thinking about how does this lead to a wider transformation. Maybe that's within your family or your wider community or within a friend or something. And I think it's interesting because God is always talking to us in the way that he knows we'll listen. And I think that then makes, sometimes it can get confusing because the way he'll talk to me will be different to the way he'll talk to other people. And I think that then being able to hear that and being able to discuss that in a way that makes sense can sometimes be a little challenging, because if he's talked to me through maybe a dream and talked to someone else through a Bible passage, that sort of connecting the dots can be quite hard. And it's very easy for us to say, well, hang on, if we connect the dots like this, then I end up in a really good position. And that will be quite nice. So I think, yeah, it's a very difficult process.
Okay. We've had another question in which relates to that. So one of the viewers has said, do all the dreams we have come from God, or do some just come from us? And how do we tell the difference? So we started to touch on that a bit. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Are we talking about like dreams as in aspirations for our lives, or like dreams that we have when we're asleep? Because if it's the second one, I really hope they're not all of them come from God, because when I eat cheese late at night, some of my dreams are incredibly strange. And if they come from God, I don't know what they mean, and I'm slightly concerned. But I'd be interested to hear what you have to say around sort of aspirations, whether they come from ourselves or come from God. I'd be interested.
Yeah, so there's different ways to look at it. So yeah, it was, do all the dreams we have come from God, or some from us, and how do we tell the difference? But yeah, it does link into dreams as in what our aspirations are as well.
Well, I think that I think Ian, you just said I agree with you. I think I've read a couple articles at least about how the strange dreams we're having during this corona crisis, right? We're in lockdown. There's serious global trauma going on right now. And anytime you go through a trauma, one of the ways that our psyche, our minds grapple with these things is through our dreams. And whether it's, I mean, sort of as we're sleeping, our mind is trying to process things. Sometimes even daydreams, you have very strange visions of, and you just interpret things differently. but also our visions for our own lives and our dreams, our aspirations, they shift. How many, I have a son who's graduating high school in a couple of weeks, and his entire vision and dream of what was going to happen next year has completely shifted. It's very different from what it was 6 months ago. And I know he's far from alone, right? So, but that's why I go back to the need to share our dreams. If Joseph was troubled by these things, he was 17 years old when he had these weird dreams that were kind of exciting. I mean, everybody, all the sheaves are bowing down to him. What's not exciting about that? You know, if you recognize that they're my big brothers, but also a little bit troubling, right? I mean, I'm 17. I'm the baby of the family so far, and what does this mean? And so I'm going to ask my community, what does this mean? Help me grapple with this. And maybe he was asking to be put in check. Maybe he was just saying, you know, I'm just giving you a heads up, giving you a warning for your future. Oh, who knows? But that's, I think, I don't believe that all dreams are from God, just like not all thoughts are from God. We test our thoughts and we weigh them against the scriptures. We weigh them against the rest of what the community says.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that comes to mind when I hear the question, do all dreams come from God? Is that I think it's perhaps worth understanding, going back to what Ian said, what do we mean by dream? Does it mean that I dream of buying a house or buying a car next week, and if I buy it, or does it mean a bigger dream? And perhaps I'm being pedantic, but I think when I think about dream, it's more about the big dream. It's more about something bigger than yourself, and those smaller goals are more aspirational or are more sort of aims that you want to achieve. But I think the dream will tend to be bigger than yourself. And even if you look at Joseph's dream, it was much bigger than him in terms of its impact. It required so many people in order for it to come into fruition. It required so many different elements and so many different life experiences for him, from the age of 17 up to well into his midlife sort of like age group. It's a long time and a lot of things happen. So I think when it comes down to it, not all dreams come from God, because as human beings, we may have our own sort of like dreams per se. But I think when it comes down to it, God does give us a dream, and this dream has to do more in line with his own vision. It has to do more in line with the vision or the mission of God. And I think in order to discern that, you need to be sensitive to the spirit. You need to have that level of seeing examples of it, but also seeing that this is not just going to be for my benefit. In fact, it's a bit like it's going to benefit others more so than you. Going back to what Tanya was saying, that it's more about the community. It's more about the wider sort of like nation or even group. And so I think we need to see it more in that sense and see how God is moving in all of this, because I think that's the most determining factor. Because if it's just to accomplish something that will benefit myself or yourself, then you have to start questioning that in some ways.
Okay.
Hopefully the community will call you out on it too.
Yeah.
I mean, well, and it doesn't always. And I think that that's part of what troubles me about what I'm seeing in a lot of places in the world, is people who have, who are able to, you know, pursue big dreams for themselves, but it's all about themselves. And we do, as human beings, we kind of like it. There's a thrill that's associated with people who find the levers of power and drawing near to them. And so that Ian was talking at the very beginning about we need leaders and followers. And once if you discern that you're better at being a follower, you can still cozy up to people who are is often only about themselves. But you think that they keep grabbing onto those coattails because they think they'll get some sort of benefit from it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, as we can see time and again, it ultimately is destructive of the wider community as well.
Okay, great. I want to bring in some of the comments that viewers have been sending in. So we've had one which links into what we're saying. So someone's commented that perhaps we should be thinking about dreams rather as visions. So thinking of dreams as visions, which might be more spirit-led. So when it links back to what Joseph was saying about it being led by the Spirit. And we've also had Ruben Sorry has sent in a question as well, which earlier Anya had said about how when she started reading the passage, she'd put herself in thought about it, how it would have been, and put herself in the shoes of Joseph. But Ruben commented that when we read this story, we normally concentrate on Joseph. But is there anything we can learn from the brothers? So if we put ourselves and looking at the other views and perspectives, what can we learn from the brothers?
That's a really good question. I think there are some serious lessons that come into play because unfortunately they saw the dream from their own perspective and they did not receive it in the way that perhaps reflectively at the end they should have received it. And so I think from the brothers' perspective, it was an issue because they had a level of hatred towards Joseph. And that jealousy comes out of the fact that you feel that someone else is taking what belongs to you. So I think it goes to show that when we fail, going back to what Tanya was saying, when we fail to follow and be effective in seeing what we need to do, because pride can sometimes come in the way. I mean, we're older, so how dare you tell us that you be ruling over us? That just doesn't make any sense. And I think it really does push us when it comes to learning how to be humble, because it's not easy to follow. We, quote unquote, a lot of people are like, I want to lead, I want to be the one doing this, that, and that. But it takes a real spirit of humility to sort of understand that in any mission, there has to be people that actually come under it and work towards it, and is seeing it beyond yourself. So I think the lessons are really there for the brothers. But not only that, history tells us that for things that are really big, for things that really go beyond a person's lifetime, it requires so many people to come and sort of like humble themselves under it and move along with it. So I think it's not just humility, it's also a sense of having an equal vision to be able to see it. Because when someone brings a vision, you need to sort of like have the faith in order to believe in that vision, because that vision is more or less like a sort of like image of what is to come. There might not be any evidence of it now, so it's hard to sort of like believe in what you do not see. But we understand that faith is sort of that evidence of things that we do not see. And so therefore we have the sense of being able to see that even though there is not much evidence of it now, we're choosing to believe in what's going to happen. And I think these are some lessons that perhaps when we look at the brothers, we can take from that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ian. Is there anything you've learned from looking at it, the perspective of the brothers?
Yeah, I was going to talk about Reuben. We haven't mentioned Reuben so far. I think he's a really interesting character within the story because he's not a leader, but he's also not a follower. He's sort of like somewhere in between the two. I think that what Reuben does is incredibly brave because he makes sure they don't kill him. And if there is 10 other people who want to kill someone and there's you telling them not to do it, it can easily end up with them just killing 2 people instead of 1. And I think that it's interesting that one of the brothers recognizes and disagrees and stands up for that. But he's also, there is an element of, is he clever by saying, let's hide him in this, let's put him in this they put him in basically a well, and then with the idea of getting him later, or will we say, well, maybe we need to be even more bold and challenge them and tell them not to kill him at all and not to do anything at all. But I think the role of Reuben is interesting because it's about, there's an element of Reuben is trying to hold the brothers accountable in some sense for their actions, to say, okay, I understand that you don't like what he's talking about, but you are going way too far. Like, why are you instantly going, or seemingly instantly going, to this very extreme position. And I think that that bravery that Reuben has is something that I think is admirable, and it reminds us that there is always benefit in having someone in a community or in something where everyone seems to think one thing. Everyone said, well, Joseph's he's an arrogant so-and-so, let's kill him. And there's one guy saying, hang on, that a bit far, like, why are you thinking this? Calm down. I think when we are discerning visions, or when we are looking at our dreams, having someone saying, is this not just a self-serving here? Is this not, to have those kind of constructed doubts, I think is a very important thing. Otherwise, you can get caught up in a moment, in a movement, and then you end up in a position where maybe you haven't followed what the vision was all about. And without him, then obviously Joseph would have been killed, and the entire story would be fundamentally different.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Tanya, have you got any thoughts about looking at the brothers' perspectives?
Yeah, I think it is interesting to think about it from the brothers' perspectives, and that's part of why community is important, why paying attention to how each other are listening. And I think Ian was sort of saying this. Reuben was the oldest child. He was Jacob's firstborn son, right? So he's the oldest brother. He's got to lead, and he didn't share with his other brothers when he said, let's not kill him, let's just put him in this pit for a little bit. And then another of the brothers said, so Reuben had obviously wandered away or was doing something different because he wasn't aware that they had sold him. So there's, this is so much about human nature, isn't it? So, we can make some money off of this. We don't need to kill him after all, but we can make some money. And so for 20 pieces of silver, they sold their brother. And that way it was a win-win in their minds. They profited a little bit and they got rid of him. And they got to go back with a tragic story about how they'd got rid of him, right? And Reuben was devastated. But I think this is part of what is challenging about this passage for us as Christians, as people of faith, especially given some of the things that we're grappling with in the world right now, is that we've got to pay attention to the aspects of our lesser nature, the ways in which those brothers gave into the temptation to understand Joseph in diminished ways. They heard his dream immediately from their own self-interest and not from saying, I wonder what this could mean. Is our brother destined for greatness? But they had the grudge, they had the chip on their shoulder, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges. And we absolutely should try to read all as much as we can. If we've got the time to wrestle with scripture, put ourselves in every different position, because it's like turning that gemstone, isn't it? To see all the different ways in which it can and should be understood.
I think I can relate to Reuben in some ways. Like, if I'm looking at it from this perspective, I can question whether he'd done enough, but I look at my own life and I've sort of thought about situations where I totally disagreed with, but perhaps I didn't do enough. I probably said that, I'm not going to do anything, but I still allowed things to happen. So I think in some ways, Reuben tried to help, but his plan to save Joseph didn't totally go the way he wanted, even though he perhaps probably saved him from dying. It sort of like rendered him into being sold into slavery. So I think it's that sense of not really wanting people to, probably his own brothers, to sort of like turn on him. So I think we can sort of like have situations like that where we go halfway because we don't want to be turned around and people start hating us or targeting us. And I think that's something that really is striking, because in his heart, he probably didn't feel the same way as his younger brothers, but you can probably argue that, did he do enough? But then for us as well, we are sometimes in situations where we go halfway and do likewise, and rather than actually standing for what is right and really being like, no, we can't kill Joseph, I'm going to take him, do you know what I mean, and go all the way. So I think that sort of like serves as a reminder, but also a way of convicting us in some cases.
I think Reuben,
go ahead, Ian.
You sure? I just think Reuben comes across as, in a sense, the most human in the passage, the most relatable, in the sense it's like the brothers seem to be a monolith. They don't have names. They're not given any of their names. And Joseph comes across as this sort of slightly sort of like spaced out dreamer kind of guy. And whereas Reuben comes across as this sort of the oldest brother who's trying to sort of negotiate his way through a tricky situation where he realizes he's in danger, but he also realizes someone else is in danger. So he's trying to cover his own back, but also help someone else out. And then it all goes a little bit wrong, and then he's not involved. And then he's like, well, do I, there's an element where it's not talked about here, and I'm not sure if it's talked about in the rest of the chapter. But that he doesn't then tell his father. That he doesn't say, well, that's not what happened. He didn't say he didn't die. They sold him. Like, there's also an element where there's a conflict within him that you can see, and I think that you don't get that element of the three-dimensional aspect of the rest of the brothers or of Joseph himself even.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to go back. This is another troubling aspect of the text, but it's also where the gospel of the text lies. Is the good news is that even the bad things that we do. So you're saying Reuben was helpful. He went halfway. He said, well, let's not kill him. And then the brother gets sold. Joseph gets sold, and they go and tell a lie to their father. But the way that they had sort of foreclosed, we don't know what God's original intention was for blessing for that family, for that community, right? It's the story could have unfolded in an entirely different way had his brothers heard his dreams in different ways. But I think what we're meant to understand is that God is going to work in all things for good, and for those who love and serve the Lord. That's the New Testament promise, isn't it? That despite the failed efforts to thwart God's intention to bless the people, they didn't even know that they were trying to thwart God's intentions. That's what happened when they were operating with a selfish agenda by getting rid of Joseph. Mm-hmm. But God used it for good. Okay. Ultimately, the blessing was there.
Yeah. Okay. So we've had another question come through. We have a few more minutes left of our program, and I know there were some other questions that we had as well. So we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. But if we try and keep our answers brief, so we can get through as many questions that in the last
around some.
Yeah. So. Is there anything, this is the question you were sent before, is there anything that you find challenging in the passage? So anything different parts of the passage to apply both generally and also during COVID as well?
Yeah, it's not the easiest story to read, especially when you look at it from just chapter 37. I guess it doesn't get better, it gets worse, and then it gets better. So there is good news. But what I do find challenging is that not everyone responds positively to your dream. Like in Joseph's position, he tells his dream to his father, he tells his dream to his brothers, and they didn't necessarily respond positively and saying that, wow, that's a fantastic dream. How can we help you? And sort of like help him, do you know what I mean, achieve this dream. We're going to assist you. Do you know what I mean? Do you need cash? Do you need this, that, and that? What do you need? That didn't happen. In fact, what happened was jealousy. And I think that's really challenging. And even for ourselves, there are situations where you might have this dream or this vision about maybe doing something within your community or doing something within your church or whatever. And people don't sort of like get behind it and say that, wow, that's an amazing dream or an amazing vision. This is how we're going to do it. And I'm sure, I don't know if Tanya's, she's got experience of ministering and leading congregation. And it's not always easy for everybody to come behind your dream. So I think that's a very hard thing to take. I think the second one is that, I mean, we don't necessarily, what we see at the end is that sometimes you're required to leave your comfort zone. And for Joseph, it wasn't a decision that he made voluntary. He was taken out of his comfort zone. He was taken out from where he served his God and he served and amongst his brothers and that into a foreign land. And I think that's a very difficult thing. I think those challenges sort of like comes to mind.
Okay, thank you. Ian, was there anything that you found challenging in the passage.
I think Joseph's completely right in the sense that there's that element of rejection. There's an element of, you know, you're dreaming and we don't like this. It's shaking up the status quo. Therefore, we're going to get rid of you. There's a big element of that from my reading. I also think there's an element of fear. I should think that the brothers are scared about how if this is going to change, how this power dynamic is going to change, what this means, and that the fear of change leads them to reject it instead of to explore it. And I think that what has happened, sort of linking it back to the current situation, what's happened is it's been interesting from at the moment is that there's been all these things that people were scared of or they were not very apprehensive about that we've had to embrace very quickly because of the current situation. So my mother works for the National Health Service, and she was saying things like, well, there's things that, you know, we've been trying to encourage people to do for ages, like having consultations online with your GP, sort of having you know, trying to discourage people from going to access an emergency unless they really need to. And they're saying, well, these things have not happened because people's day-to-day lives have been so fundamentally disrupted. You know, I can't go and see my friends. I shouldn't go shopping unless I need to. And I think that that has made the fear of change be fundamentally sort of reevaluated. I also think that in a way, because there isn't this, oh, I get up and I go to work and then, you know, the kids go to school, and there's not this routine that we're all used to, that people are more scared. And I think that when people are more scared, that things like what has happened in this passage can happen, where people unite behind an idea or someone that causes a problem. I think, obviously, Tanya, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this. I think about, you know, what's happening in the US at the moment and the immense amount of violence that's happening in your country, and how that is, it's scary to see it from even on the news in the UK, and I imagine it's even more scary where you are. And I think that there's an element of uncertainty and fear and how you respond to that. And this passage shows a very negative response. And I think that fear can lead in two ways. Fear can lead to growth and to development and support, but it can also lead to victimizing and hatred. And I think there's a lesson for us about fear in this passage as well.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think I resonate with everything they've said. I agree. And I think that the lesson for the church in all of this is to be careful listeners, to be attentive, especially to the voices that make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, and to listen for the voice of God and to ask what is the greater purpose in all of this, and to remember that, you know, this moment that we're living in right now is not the end of the story. The end of the story is further down the line, and it has everything to do with how we respond. But not just that, regardless of how we respond, God is going to find a way to bring blessing out of this. So those are the important things to remember. I think in terms of how the church is responding to this, we are learning new ways of being. Yes, I am seeing all over the place that we're having to overcome our fears. I've had to learn how to do everything online and do online virtual church services. This trialogue is a brilliant example of feeling the fear, discerning the vision, trying something, testing it, seeing whether or not it works. If it flies, if it's got wings, then the spirit is beneath it. If it doesn't, then you know, we try something else. But just this experience, the ability to be curious and experimental, and to be open to listening to our neighbor. That's the main thing I think we've got to learn in this, and we are learning it. I think a lot of Christians are learning it.
Just really quickly, I think you're so right. There's an element of, I think we forget. I did history at university, and I'm very interested in that. And I think that what you can always do in a history book is you can always read the last page. And you can always say, oh, and this is how this ended. Whereas at the moment, we don't know what the last page is. And I think that's so hard, because it's like, we're not used to being within the Western world, I think in particular, we're not used to being in a situation which is so fundamentally scary and different and new, and not being able to say, well, it's going to end up like this. Like, you know, even in times of upheaval and distress, or like an election, you know that one party is going to win, but at the moment we've got no idea. And I think that is that's a really good point. I think that's where a lot of the uncertainty comes from.
Okay. That brings, unfortunately, our time has ran out for this evening. It's been a really good conversation. And as we've said, we want Trialogue to be a platform for conversations. And we hope that you will carry on the conversations. Take a look in the description for the Going Deeper resources. You can carry on and use that as a tool, and do carry on these conversations with other people. There's a few questions we didn't get through tonight. So one of them, maybe these are things that you could talk with in your group. So I share them very quickly for if you want to continue these conversations. So what do you do when the plan that we think is from God doesn't appear to work out? When the door we thought we were to walk through shuts? So what happens? That links directly into our theme of Dash Dreams. What happens when things don't go right? And we also had, where do we see the church living out this teaching? So in what practical ways can we apply the themes that we've talked about tonight, about community, about when we looked about how we can have, when we think of our dreams and visions and how they're led by the Spirit, where do we see churches? How can we practically live that out in our day-to-day lives? But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for sharing in the conversations. Thank you everyone who's watching and joined along tonight and contributed in by sending in questions. Also in the description, we want Trialogue to be your program. We love when you send things in. We've also got a survey in the description where we want to know your thoughts. Trialogue is now in its 5th week, but we want to adapt and make it to hear what you think about it and how we can improve Trialogue as well. So do please take a look and fill in the questionnaire as well to share your thoughts. And thank you for listening. Thank you for everyone for joining us in the panel. I will close in prayer. Dear God, thank you for our conversations tonight as we have seek to listen to each other as part of a community and to hear and be guided by you and guided by your Spirit. Help us to continue those discussions and to continue thinking how we can, what they mean for us today in 2020 and how we can apply those, apply your teaching in our lives and the way in which we live and act. Be with everybody over the next few days who is here tonight and keep us safe. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.